the law to protect our information sources? And the answer to that is actually very simple. It's not that only we can, we have to do that. Because for a journalist, and especially for an investigative journalism, protecting your source, that's the main task you actually have to do. Because in investigative journalism, when you work with your sources, with whistleblowers who provide you with information you otherwise cannot hold of, they usually are under serious threat if they provide you with confidential information or with some data that is not publicly accessible. And there is no other way how you can get that information. And therefore they run in serious problems, either with police or with their employees. And therefore it's very important that you protect their identity. So, but the thing that you always have to take in account is it really in public interest? The information you receive from those whistleblowers, from your information sources, if you publish that information, first, of course, you check it, you put it in context, and when you publish it, is it really in public interest? Because I don't know how in your countries, but in my country, especially before elections, a lot of political parties start providing journalists with all sorts of, we call it black PR, with the information that is actually damaging to their political opponents. And in that case, it's very important to see if that information, when you publish it, is it in public interest, or you are just helping one political party to make other political party to look bad. So, so even though the national or your local law might not see national law enforcement authorities don't always see it in that way. Still, the protection of sources is very important. And let me tell my story. It was in 2010, on February, I received information from a source who called himself Neo from a movie Matrix. And he gave me information on a database of the State Revenue Service. So what he has done, he has been hacking in the database of the State Revenue Service and downloading all the data from the State Revenue Service database. And it's huge amount. He's been sort of working on that for 3 months, downloaded more than 7 million documents. And it's a lot for my country because there are only 2 million inhabitants. So he actually downloaded all the information, so about all the taxes that have been paid. You also, in that database, you could see how big are salaries of every person in Latvia who has paid taxes or whose companies have paid taxes. So he got hold of that information, and then he contacted me saying that there is a huge hole in the security of State Revenue Service database, and he has got hold of all that information. So what we did, we went, of course, straight to the State Revenue Service and informed them that they have a hole, because we didn't know what kind of person this Neo guy is, because with all that information, a lot of confidential information, you can actually do a lot of blackmailing, you can sell that information, so there can be also commercial reasons for downloading or for obtaining that information as well. But what Neo did is he started to release information first to me and then afterwards also to other journalists about state-owned companies, about public institutions, showing the salaries people in those institutions got. And why was it so important back then? 2010 was a time of economic crisis in Latvia, and the government had to cut salaries for people working in public sector, and there was serious cuts, a lot of austerity measures and so on. But from the data Neo provided, we could see that those cuts were not based on the principle of solidarity, meaning that people with a lower rank, for instance, in the ministries, experienced bigger cuts in salaries, while the top management still received their bonuses. So in that sense, it was clearly to show that information and to analyze it and to inform public about lack of solidarity on the high level of management in state-owned companies. It was clearly a question of public interest. After of course, we released our stories both on the fact that there was a major hole in the database of the State Revenue Service, and also about the information we received from NEO, the police started a criminal investigation. And a week after we did our story, the police came to TV station. I worked for investigative journalistic program called De Facto. We were airing every week, Sunday night program, prime time. So it was sort of by releasing that story, we really sort of made the headlines all over the media. So the police came to TV station, came to ask me if I can disclose the source of my information. And of course I refused that. According to law in Latvia, and I guess it's the same more or less in all countries, only the court can ask you to disclose your source of information. Who is that person who provided you with information? But even if the court decides that you have to disclose that information, you still can disobey court and say, well, I'll better go and sort of serve my couple of days in prison rather than disclose my sources. Because the trust of your sources is actually very basis of being a good journalist. Because if your sources or your potential sources see that you cannot be trusted, that you under small pressure are willing to disclose their identity, they will never come to you. So it's a trust which is very difficult to gain. It takes years, it takes hard work, but you can lose it in just a second. You know, one wrong word, one sort of wrong comment to police or to authorities, and you have ruined your reputation as a journalist who can really sort of protect his or her sources. So at that moment, I did not disclose, and I said that I will not disclose who is my source, even though we were using his name, Neo, so which of course is not his real name. And then 3 months later, police came to my home. And that was a bit, let's say, traumatic experience. I was home alone that night, and I came late, 9:30, something at home. Opened the doors of my flat. I live in an apartment building. Entered my flat and was trying to close the door from inside. And then suddenly a guy in a civil, not in a uniform, ran down the stairs and with force opened my door and entered my flat. And I still remember very vividly the thoughts that were running through my mind. I was thinking, shall I hit him in the face or shall I hit him in the stomach? And I couldn't make up my mind. And I thought, well, if I hit him in the face, he probably will hit me back, but in the stomach, so I couldn't make up my mind. So I didn't make the right move, so maybe I should have. And then 2 other guys entered my flat. So I was late in the evening with 3 guys, not in uniforms, just in sort of civil clothes. Young guys, well, 2 of them were quite good looking, but it was not, that there was no romantic feeling about that. And only then they showed that they have a search warrant of my flat. They were looking for possible evidence that could allow them to identify who was the source of my information, who was that Neo guy. They took my computer, my hard disk, all the flash memory cards that I had. And what interesting thing was, and that's probably, maybe that can sort of help you in future if you happen to come to such situation. of course, when the search is going on, you are not allowed to use your phone. And the police, there were guys from, those were guys from economic police, said that I'm not allowed to use my phone. But you always are allowed to call your lawyer. So when they said you cannot use your phone, I somehow didn't really, you know, being scared and nervous, I didn't really think it through that actually there was one call I was allowed to make, and that was to my lawyer. And now, for instance, thinking back at those days, and there was probably one more thing that I would have done differently. I wouldn't have allowed them to take my computer with any physical sort of fight. And why? I think it would make a better even story, because I kind of imagine myself sitting and, you know, really holding my computer with both of my hands, and then in order to get hold of it, they probably would need to hit me. And if I could get a blue eye from a policeman, imagine that would be a really good story. You know, you really could prove that you've been abused by police. Well, didn't do that time. Probably next time when the situation comes, I'll be smarter. So what I did next day, of course, and that was the first time in Latvia when journalists' home was searched in order to find journalists' sources of information. Next day, of course, it was all over the news. I talked to my lawyers, and we tried to make to go to the court and asking that this search warrant was illegal, especially because it was approved post factum, not before the search itself. But very soon we exhausted all the legal possibilities to deal with that in Latvia, and then we decided that we're gonna go to the European Court of Human Rights because that was a very clear example of breach of expression of freedom, because journalists, because the police is supposed, or any sort of authorities are supposed to find a balance between their need to ensure evidence and journalists' task to provide information. And in this case, police just should have worked without involving media in trying to find their information, who is Neo. And also the problem was that the computers they took from me and all the data, they contained information not only on that specific case, but also on my other information sources, which was of a sort of big problem for me. Because what I was afraid of is that I'm gonna lose credibility in eyes of my current and my potential future information sources, which luckily didn't happen, but there was a risk. So in the European Court of Human Rights, usually the case takes 4 or 5 years. In my case, it was 2.5 years, which is extremely fast for European Court of Human Rights. It's probably something to do also with the fact that it was a breach of expression of freedom, and also because media was involved. So probably for that reason, the court speeded up the case. In the end of the day, I won Latvian state. The whole sort of case was called Nagla against Latvia. It's in a way, it's a weird feeling that you are going against your own state to court, and when you are awarded the sort of the damages, the court decides that your government has to pay you certain amount or to lawyers. You know that that is a taxpayer's money, and it's actually your money. But there is no other way how you can prove that the police cannot go to a home of a journalist just because that journalist has talked to or received information from someone who is under investigation. I mean, a lot of my sources have been, well, I wouldn't say criminals, but they have breached a law in some way. But the idea is that it's, even though my information source or so-called whistleblower has obtained information illegally or maybe by breaching laws of sort of rules of confidentiality, I'm still, when I publish that information, and I do it, of course, critically, I'm not breaking the law. If the question of the public interest, if that's done in the name of public interest, if that aspect is there. For instance, if someone makes illegally pictures of your prime minister who is naked and then sends it to you, if you publish it, well, there's no public interest in that. So, but if your prime minister is caught on pictures or on tape, having a mistress, and he's a very conservative person who always supports family values, and then you got a tape on tape that he actually has a mistress, that's a very different story. So the public interest is a key to that. When on more practical side, if you run a case like that and you exhaust all the possibilities to kind of with local authorities to get your case straight, then from that moment when local authorities say that, well, you have exhausted all your possibilities, you have 6 months to hand in your case in the European Court of Human Rights. So that's 6 months. It's important to have a good lawyer, but for journalists, it's always a bit easier than probably for other persons, because a lot of lawyers would agree to work pro bono, which means without, you don't have to pay them, because it's usually a high-profile case. And then in the end of the day, if you win, then they will they will get the money anyway from the government, because they have to cover the legal expenses. So so that's sort of, you have to fit within those 6 months. But the protection of information sources and of whistleblowers, it's becoming more and more important, and actually more and more difficult. If you've seen the last cases of Manning, of Snowden, I mean, they are all sources of whistleblowers, sources of information for someone, for journalists. And the general trend is that whistleblowers do get in trouble, especially because in many countries, very few countries have laws protecting whistleblowers. But therefore, a journalist has to take extreme care when he's contacting his source. For instance, if you need to speak on the phone with your source, then it's probably better if you use not your own current mobile phone, but you buy a cheap phone, hopefully without all this GPS stuff and everything. You buy, there are cards you can put in the phone as well, buy it separately. And it's important that you never have those two phones. One is your personal phone, and one is, for instance, just for contacting that specific source. You never have them on at the same time. So you switch off your regular phone, you walk somewhere, and then you switch your, or sort of the other phone. The phone is just, which is only meant to contact your source, because then it's much more difficult for police or someone who is listening or tapping into your or that person's phone lines to actually make the connection. For instance, police these days can actually track down, if, for instance, both of those phones are switched on at the same time, all the time, then they can actually track down that they belong to the same person. So you have to make sure that both of those phones are never switched on together. Another tip that might be of value is, and that's also something that Klaus said, if you go to meet your source, make sure that somebody knows that you are meeting your source. You don't have to disclose his identity. For instance, my colleagues do not know who my sources are, as I don't know who are their sources. There was one case when I got a call from a source he wanted to meet, and my colleagues knew that I'm meeting a source I don't know, but he will sort of take me somewhere in his car. So I told my colleagues that I'm meeting a source. I went, sat in his car. He asked me to switch off the phone, to take out the battery, and we were driving around for 2 hours. We had a really good chat, a lot of interesting information, but my colleagues went really crazy because after an hour, they tried to call me and my phone was off and they were afraid what has happened to me. So it's always kind of, there are precautions, what you have to do to protect your sources, but also precautions when you have to protect yourself as well. And the same thing goes also for places where you meet with your sources. You have to be sure that for instance, because I work on TV and I'm also a TV presenter, so my face is kind of well known in Latvia. So if somebody is seen talking to me, then it's most likely then his boss or maybe his colleagues will not understand that he's leaking information to a journalist. So that our conversation most likely is not private, but it's about business. So therefore it's important to find your places where you can meet in private and without the public eye. And because that's also a way how you can ensure that identity of your source is protected. And my time is up.
We don't have much time for questions, but I'm willing to go for one.
Thanks for your sharing. And I've got a question in that. Where do you think is the safest place to store your resources, and where you could put your sources, your data, such as the backup data, where could you put it? And yeah.
Well, there is no easy answer to that. Probably, in a way, it's safer if you keep it at work, because police is very unwilling to come and search, for instance, newsroom of a public television or of a major newspaper. But there's sometimes information you just, you have to be creative where you hide it. One sort of place where, what I used is, if you have to exchange emails, I mean, there are a lot of anonymous servers you can use or anonymous chat rooms you can contact your source. But when it comes to emails, it's probably better if you create an email address which is known only, and a password which is known only to you and your source. And then you write drafts in that inbox, in that email address, in that inbox, rather than sending emails to each other, because emails can be traced. So if you have an email address and then you just, both of you log into that email, see the drafts, leave another draft, but you don't actually send emails. That's a little bit safer. There are programs that allow you to encrypt information, but with big data, yeah, then probably you have to exchange hard drives or something, because sending it by email, and again, there are some proxy servers, anonymous proxy servers abroad that you can use, but it is a bit tricky. But it's always good if you have an IT person. I mean, a journalist needs 3 good friends. One guy who is IT professional and can help you with encrypting data, telling what's new and how you can hide your proxy, or how you can deal with all those problems. Another person is lawyer. Both, if you get in trouble, and always, as Angela also mentioned, before publishing a story, run it by your lawyer, because otherwise you might get sued, not because you have done something wrong, but just because your own mistakes or stupidity. And the third person, he's probably A financial director. Not because of sort of personal financial advice, but because there is someone who can read books of a company. And not just as, you know, we see profit, balance, but really tell from the books what exactly is wrong with that company. And that's usually really good financial directors who, by looking at the numbers, actually see the company behind it and all the fishy business that is going on. So 3 good friends, and then you're fine.
Okay, I saw somebody here who's, I think, desperate to ask a question. It will be the last one for you, but please talk to her after the conference.
Thank you. My question is like that. Why you choose believe in the law system when the government signed the place to a home? I mean, the law system always have some special link to the government.
It's not, I think it's not a question if I believe in them, but if the police comes with badges that they show afterwards and with a search warrant, and there are 3 of them and I'm home alone, there's not really much I can do. Well, I could have screamed, would my neighbors come to help me? No, I don't think so. I mean, I have an old lady living on one side and another old lady with a cat on the other side. I don't think that I would receive much of the help. I mean, at that point, because that's the whole point. If you are asked by court to reveal your source of information, you can say no. And if they send you to, I don't know, to serve a couple of days in prison or something, you do that. But if they come physically to your place and take your information sources, there's actually nothing you can do. Maybe I should try and, you know, a little bit of bodybuilding and, you know, be physically more fit. That would help, but still, I don't think that that's a solution.
I can't say no to students who want to ask questions, so I'm going to let you have the chance.
Hi. I wanted to ask, did you have any bad outcome from the government side? Like, do you work in a public television? Like, so it's like as a person, you know, like, do they try to you know, to punish you in some kind of way?
No, actually, yeah, I worked for public television, but the government, and I also talked afterwards to the Minister of Justice, and once the ruling of the Court of the Human Rights was out, he actually called me personally and apologized. I mean, they did understand that the police has sort of crossed the line, and they shouldn't have done that. So I didn't sort of feel any kind of, didn't get, at least not in my face, maybe behind my back, and there was a lot of public support for my case. There even was a sort of public support in the front of the Cabinet of Ministers for me and also for the Neo who was arrested. When his place was searched, we were searched at the same night. But he also got arrested and he was kept in custody for 2 days. And I mean, my case in the European Court of Human Rights is over, but his case just started in April. So imagine we were searched in 2010, and now only his case is in court, and he's facing 5-year prison term. I hope it will not happen, because I mean, he did it out of purely idealistic reasons, because he could have sold that data, he could have earned money, but he didn't do that. And he released only that information that was really of public interest, not about private companies, but only on public companies, on state-owned companies. And he's got a wife and 2 kids. And I mean, if he's sent to prison, then it's a really, really bad message to all other whistleblowers. And it's also to all other information sources for journalists, because, you know, how can you expect somebody to do something, risking your freedom, if that's for the idealistic reasons, if you can end up in prison? Well, he didn't really break the system. There was a major security hole, so he didn't sort of break any passwords or anything. But he's facing trial now because he was in possession of confidential data, and he was he used programs to kind of to work with the data to scan out information that he needed, and then he provided to me and afterwards also to other journalists.
Okay,
Anything
thank
else?
you very
Okay,
much, Ilze.
thank you.
And please do talk to her later.